For the entire Republican period, that is 1912 to 1949, the Chinese state controlled only a fraction of the territory that it claimed. Outer Mongolia and Tibet had declared independence during the revolution, Xinjiang was in large part de facto independent, and even parts of the area that claimed to be loyal to the Republic was often divided between warlords or other autonomous regimes. European powers controlled enclaves in dozens of port cities, and from 1931 Japan occupied Manchuria. As a result, discussions of territory and space in Republican China were focused on areas within the country's putative borders rather than beyond them. As Jim has outlined, the Qing Great State was a multi-ethnic empire in which, broadly speaking, 5 script communities, Sinitic or Chinese, Turkic, Tibetan, Mongol and Manchu, and dozens of smaller highland groups pledged loyalty to a Manchu emperor. Constructing a Chinese nation-state from this patchwork of peoples took 20 years of intellectual effort, followed by several decades of violence. A new identity was imagined, the one we call Chinese, with a new history and an attachment to a defined piece of territory. None of this was guaranteed at the outset, and it remained fragile. To demonstrate the point, there were different definitions of the national territory in each of the 7 drafts of the Republic's constitution between 1912 and 1946. Significantly for this project, however, none made claims beyond what was thought to be the old Qing Empire's boundaries, although, as Jim has written, the frontier was a process, not a place. Overall, governments of the Republic recognised the territorial settlements that had been forced upon the Qing, including the cession of Taiwan. They had little choice but to do so. It was only in 1942, following the entry of the US into the Second World War, that Chiang Kai-shek realised that China had the opportunity to reshape regional geopolitics. I'm going to offer a few snapshots of moments in the first half of the 20th century, focusing on fears about the frontier and the efforts to simultaneously create a Chinese state and to incorporate non-Chinese peoples and the spaces that they inhabited within it. And I'm going to concentrate on the nationalist movement, mainly because they were in power, but also because I haven't studied the communist side. Territory was a particular preoccupation of Sun Yat-sen. In 1899, he drew a map of a future country which he called Jina, not Zhongguo or Zhonghua, sketching out the lines of railways that would enable its modernization. But the focus of his map, which was published the following year, was China proper, the former provinces of the Ming state, the region of the Han people. He was less interested in the rest. In accompanying notes, he divides the Qing realm into Jina Benbu, China proper, and its dependencies, or Dishu, Manchuria, Mongolia, Tibet and Xinjiang, divided in 2 parts. Sun followed the map with an essay the following year, in the wake of the Boxer Rising and the Eight-Nation invasion, which argued that Westerners were plotting to carve up China because they were afraid it would become as powerful as the Mongols. It's clear, however, that his vision of Jina is still focused on the 18 provinces of the former Ming state. It was probably Liang Qichao who persuaded Sun to take more interest in the non-Han areas. Liang wanted to preserve the territory of the great state, partly because he wanted to reform the existing empire, but also because he saw the other 4 script areas as necessary for the success of the reformed empire. They were rich in resources but thinly populated. If not defended, other states, particularly Russia and British India, might take them. To legitimize the incorporation of these areas into the future Chinese state required some major intellectual innovations on Liang's part, including the construction of a greater nationalism that included groups beyond the Han. Implicit within this view was the conviction that the non-Chinese inhabitants of the areas around China proper would either eventually become Chinese by interbreeding or by demographic domination. The Han were the master race into which the other peoples of the Qing realm would merge to form the new nation. This vision of a single Chinese nation was, however, thwarted by the politics of the 1911-12 revolution, which resulted in the new republic becoming the state of 5 races, with the inhabitants of each of the script areas being given a stripe on the national flag. If we skip ahead to the 1930s, anxiety about territory was one of the characteristic features of the Nanjing Decade. In part, this was the result of attacks by foreign powers, but it was also deliberately inculcated. Among many other devices, maps of national humiliation were displayed in schools and public buildings to teach the population about the apparent loss of territory to other states. But, despite appearances, there doesn't seem to have been a corresponding narrative demanding the reclamation of these territories. They were simply lost. Instead, their stories were just used as a warning about the future intentions of foreign powers and the need to forge a unified nation in defence. The representation of the state's territory continued to be an issue. In January 1930, regulations were promulgated requiring the verification of all published maps. These were revised the following year, just as Japan began its invasion of Manchuria. At the end of 1931, France claimed the Paracel Islands in the South China Sea, setting off another round of territorial anxiety. At around the same time, one of the Republic's most influential newspapers, the Shunbao, decided to organise an expedition around the country's borders, but discovered there was no agreement about where they lay. Instead, it produced an atlas which was, in essence, a work of fiction. At the time, the Republic controlled only a fraction of the area within the national boundary printed on the maps. Nonetheless, the atlas became a standard reference for the following decades. In 1933, another frontier crisis developed when France claimed some of the Spratly Islands. It became clear that the central government did not understand the geography of the South China Sea. The Maps Inspection Committee was ordered to redouble its work. In 1938, a geography professor called Zhang Qian became, in effect, Chiang Kai-shek's geopolitical advisor. During 1942 and 43, he wrote a series of articles on the military history of China, expounding on the importance of geographical circumstances for military success. In 1942, after Pearl Harbor, President Roosevelt suggested that China become one of the four policemen of the post-war world, with a future geostrategic role in Asia. It was part of FDR's decolonization agenda and promoted China to great power status, at least in theory. In November that year, Chiang began drafting his book, China's Destiny, with the help of ghostwriters, one of whom was Zhang. Among many other topics, China's destiny includes the question of national defence. If even one area is occupied by a different race, then the entire nation and entire state loses the natural barriers for self-defence, he wrote. Therefore, Taiwan, Penghu, the four northeast provinces, Inner and Outer Mongolia, Xinjiang and Tibet are all strongholds for the protection of the nation's survival. There is a chauvinistic vision of the country here. In order to defend China, the surrounding areas need to be incorporated into its defences, regardless of their ethnic composition. Interestingly, in June 1943, Zhang Qian was invited to the US by the Department of State. His original 6-month visit was extended until the autumn of 1945, and he became a key figure in explaining China to American officials, while also offering ideas to the Kuomintang government on future policy. In conclusion, I would argue that Chinese nationalists began drawing mental and physical maps as part of the process of constructing a new national consciousness in order to force the reform or overthrow of the Qing regime. This was perceived in social Darwinist terms as a struggle for survival against the white race and their foreign powers. The shape of the national territory was not known at the beginning of this process, but was defined by two imperatives: to provide strength for the country through incorporating both natural resources and defensive depth, and to match the ideological definition of the nation. Anxiety about the national territory, including the loss of large areas to neighbouring states, was deliberately inculcated by the nationalists as a tactic of legitimation. This did not become recidivism, however. The boundary may have been undefined, but it was conceived of as a fixed limit to national ambitions. The Republic lived in a state of existential fear. It felt it needed the resources and the space of the outer areas to protect the inner ones. But the outer areas were also a source of danger and instability because they were not Han. They would have to be made Chinese. The main instruments for this mission were the overwhelming demographic domination of the Han population and the construction of railways into remote areas. Thank you.